How else do you see yourself contributing to the re-education of Black people in the future? Are you currently working on anything?
Oh, I'm always thinking about the future. Over the years, I've been known as a person who documents many things, many events. For example, my personal collections are at several universities. The bulk of it is at George Washington University, the Government Library, Emory and Henry Library in Virginia, University of Minnesota, William and Mary in Virginia, Harvard. So anybody who's looking at my life and looking at the people that I interacted with, the documentation is there. We already have scholars that are beginning to look at my collection. People are beginning to write books about well-known writers. For example, June Jordan, who's a major African-American poet. People have gone to my letters to get a better understanding of her life, her contribution. So I'm very much aware of where I stand in terms of African-American culture, and especially in terms of the future. I look at how this year we had a major conference gathering over at George Washington University Kellman Library, where all the writers who are very active here in the DC area came to the Gilman Library because we set up a literary archive. Everybody's donating their papers there, so in the future scholars will be able to look at the material and assess what happened in 2013. Well, at the program, the librarians gave an account of how this came to be. And what happened is back, like maybe 20, 25 years ago, I was giving a talk at George Washington University, and I mentioned the need for an archive, a literary archive. And a friend of mine at that time said, can you flesh that out? So I wrote the original proposal, for this to be developed, and here it was years later, and it was being developed. And so I'm always aware of putting things aside in terms of for future scholars, mentoring scholars. I look at right now, I'll be 63 this month. What's beginning to happen, the people that I've mentored are coming of age. They're now beginning to run things. And so when I look at around the country, young people moving into positions of power and influence, I take pride in that, because that's my legacy.
Right. That's nice. Why is it important to learn about the contributions of the African diaspora to the wider community?
Well, first of all, we use a word like diaspora. I think that word is totally obsolete. I don't think we're no longer dispersed because of the technology. I'm surprised that in 2013 you'll hear someone using the word diaspora as opposed to Pan-Africanists.
Okay.
Because what happens now, if we're very much aware of Black people around the world, I can sit here right now and communicate with a Black person living in Norway or Australia. Okay, so where before people might have been out there and I didn't know they were out there. Oh, the Black people in Paraguay. I know that now. Okay, what do I do with that information? Well, the first thing that has to happen, I have to change my vocabulary. If I continue to use the word diaspora, never disperse, then that type of thing is that we've been scattered. Well, as you can see in terms of your own use of technology, you're bringing things together, okay? So it's been dispersed over the years, but the technology now brings it to one place. The same way you see, okay, you might pull everything through your Facebook page, You have ways of saying, okay, I'm just going to pull everything and just use one device. Well, that's how you have to think intellectually, okay? I can't think of myself being separated from Black people who are in Japan, or Germany. I have to understand that I'm aware of that. Now, if you can't identify Barbados or blacks in Iowa, then you're gonna have a problem. You see? And I think that what happened, we have to change the language, and we're using 19th and 20th century language in the 21st century.
Is there any historical or contemporary figure who you consider to be a true representation of Black consciousness?
Well, you look at somebody, when you say Black consciousness, you'd have to ask yourself, what Black person would touch Black people throughout the world, okay? One person who I keep like over my desk is the great scholar Walter Rodney, because when you look at Walter Rodney's life, you can see Walter Rodney touching Blacks in the Caribbean, U.S., Africa. You don't have someone whose thinking is that broad. I mean, Du Bois was like that. I saw C.L.R. Jane. In my lifetime, Walter Rodney is the key.
So tell us a little bit about your poem Geography. I read it and I really liked it a lot.
Geography is a poem about my daughter who's now 31. It has a lot to do with how you raise a child. What I saw very early when my daughter was very young, like most children, she would draw and say, oh, here's a picture of Daddy. And she would draw these pictures, and I would give them back to her. I said, that looks like a little white daddy. That's not me. And that became an interesting discussion within my household because my wife's background is also education. She said, well, don't reject the drawing by your daughter, and she's just going through a stage. And I said, I don't see little white kids going through a stage where they're calling themselves black, okay? And so what was very interesting, and I saved these documents, my daughter went from drawing little white daddies, then began to draw father figures using all different colors, green, red, all the other colors, right? Then she finally broke into like brown, okay? But what's interesting, she created figures that had no faces, no nose, no eyes. And then after that, she finally broke into representing herself, okay? What I found very interesting is that when I went to a school fair, like open house, okay, where all the children have their artwork on the wall, and this is elementary school, I could stand in the doorway and pick out my daughter's work because and this is mostly all black kids. She was the only one drawing and coloring herself in, and I used that as the introduction, to the poem that I'll read. Geography. My 4-year-old daughter comes home from school with a map of the world. This is Africa, she tells me. This is where we come from. Daddy, watch me color the rest of the world. I watch her color Europe red and all of the Atlantic. I try to encourage the use of blues and greens, but she refuses. She sees the world with her own brown eyes. My daughter stops coloring and prints her name at the top of her map. Jasmine, she says, like a young Columbus, her mouth round with wonder. Now let me tell you something that happened about this poem. A couple of years ago, maybe about 4 years ago, gentleman who's heads up the Fulbright organization came to give a talk here at Howard to encourage people at Howard to apply to become Fulbright scholars. In the middle of his speech, he reaches into his pocket and pulls out this poem. And he says, this poem captures the Fulbright, what we hope would be the Fulbright experience of young people going out and discovering the world. So you can see that here is a poem that I wrote about a specific thing, dealing with, raising my child. Here is an individual who headed up the Fulbright organization years later, using the same poem to say, okay, it conveys the values and approach we want young people to come into our organization to be scholars, to have that sense of discovery. So you would go from Howard University to Kenya or Hungary or somewhere in Africa, and that sort of discovery is what I was hoping my daughter would see. She would not be limited by not even coloring herself. You asked about re-education, and I thought that was very interesting because I challenged that concept. Because to me, when you say, okay, re-educating black people, it sounded as if, for example, we were in some sort of totalitarian state where we're going to take somebody and say, okay, like it was China under Mao Zedong, or Vietnam after the war, where we put you in a re-education camp. And then, we're going to re-educate you. And what happens is, I tell people jokingly, the black experience is not monolithic, okay? If we look at African-American culture, I wouldn't confuse John Coltrane with Charlie Parker, okay? I was joking to my wife this morning. I said, we're more of a buffet race, where we go in and they say, do you want the menu or do you want the buffet, right? The menu is like, that's where you get the re-education. Buffet, I go get what I want, right? So if you want to eat this way, where you're here this way, dress this way, talk this way, yeah, that's the African-American culture. The worst thing to do would be to feel, come to Howard, that there's some way that all black people need to think a certain way. Now, what do we feel in terms of education? You should, as a black person, know something about African American history. Okay? It's no longer something that's missing. You should have that on the table. But what happens is that you cannot tell people this is how you should interpret that history. I mean, here you two are here. You are two different black women. Okay, I wouldn't want you to come in here with the same little suits and stuff like this. Two people asking the same question. No, you're separate people. You come to this point with different backgrounds. Okay, you're gonna go in different directions. If I told you right now, okay, you're gonna both have to agree to do this, this, and this, we're gonna have some problems here. You see, and you don't want to educate people in such a way that you leave here believing, okay, I've been educated a certain way. Okay. I look at recently, this is very recent, we've had some people graduate from Howard University and they just have having problems now adjusting to the world outside. They were given food here that didn't go down well. So what happens, right? You know, you're here and you eat meat, and all of a sudden you get outside, it's the vegetarian platter, and you go just like that. Right. And what happened, you know, one of the things that you'll see just using food, okay? When you travel, okay, say for example, you were coming into my house today, I would go and get something for you and present it. Now, it may be something that you didn't like or whatever, but you realize it is not the meal itself what we're actually eating, but the fact that I'm coming and I'm sharing, I'm breaking bread with you. That's the most. So you can take a nibble, you know. I mean, unless you're Muslim, you say, well, it's pork, and you know, most of the thing, well, do you have some juice? But you're going to take something here, and that's how. If you haven't been raised that way, it's very important. That could be the thing where maybe you're hiring somebody or you're going somewhere. The whole thing first of offering somebody something and sitting down, that's the key thing. It's so important to have. But what happened? We're very, very diverse, and you want to make sure that when you go out here, you're able to sit down with different people. You can't go out here and be so black that here comes the white person. Oh, you know, they hired me because I was black, and you know, I wore my hair, and I was just a little too militant. No, you didn't know, you weren't good for the job. That's why they didn't hire you. You see, you know, and what happened if we do hire you? Okay, I want you to be able to mix with the other workers. You see, you know, I mean, that's a society that we are building. Now, I will deal with something just to make it very, very contemporary with identity. And maybe this has a lot to do with our society where we're dealing with privatization and bringing consultants in. I've been trying to make sense out of the new branding and sign. You know, born blue, live blue, and bleed blue. If I just read it in terms of the logic of it, I mean, I'm just reading it as text. It makes no sense. Okay, born blue. Now, I can take you not far from here, because I had a person come from. I can take you up into the Appalachian Mountains up here in Virginia, and this is really in mountains, and there are blue people. Born blue. They are blue people. You may never have seen. Have you ever seen the blue people? Do you know blue people exist? You're probably like the people who are sitting in the room with listening to the consultant saying, "Boy, no, there are blue people. They're very much up in the Appalachian Mountains. You know, they're blue people." Now, what happened? It's not popular. I have, for example, when I was teaching, I had a young kid come down. He had never seen black people. He had never seen black people. He was that. He had never seen black people coming out of the mountains. That's the type of world we're living in. Okay. Now, the whole thing of living blue, I looked at that and bleeding blue. And what are the concepts behind that? It says bleed blue, and the guy over a hurdle, you know. And then I look at the people, and I say, "Are these genetic black people that you would get off the internet and make a, you know?" It's not like I see you in an ad, and you know, or somebody who won a big award, they're in there, you know. And we were doing that in terms of, you know, people like in the newspaper, somebody got a Rhodes Scholar or something like that. So you could have those type of faces. So I said, "Wow, you know, I remember that person. They were here." You would change it periodically, but here it is in terms of branding and dealing with the educational images. I don't know who came up with that. See, so when you talk about the questions you asked me about identity and things of that sort, it has to carry over to me and also you when you're in a decision making. How now do I deal with the public relations of Howard University based on my knowledge and of living? See, now go from there and go down to the Mandela exhibit. And there's something in there that I found very interesting, and there's no connection. If you go to my website from many years ago, it says the same thing: living the legacy, which is the slogan for the Nelson Mandela Foundation. Okay, now, doesn't that make a better sense in terms of the Go Blue, living the legacy? And you would have pictures of Frederick Douglass and others. That's what we're talking about. Now, maybe we do need to have the re-education camp for those individuals. But that's it. And also, do you know your family medical history?
I guess so.
That's not good. What happens is that you will be getting an education that the first people that you really will help will be your own family members. So that you come out of med school and your mother, father is sick years from now, they're going to count on you to more than the doctor. See? And if you know what illnesses or diseases are in substance like diabetes or cancer, then you know how to stay healthy as well as preventive medicine for your folks.